Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webcast, Import Spreadsheets and ETL Mappings via ERwin to the Web Portal. Today we have with us Jeff Harris from Sandhills Consultants, who will be sharing with us options for how to import into the Web Portal utilizing the data lineage mappings and their own importer as well. Jeff has been with Sandhills for many years and a long-time friend of ERwin. I would like to point out to folks that you are on you are on mute so that you can't talk over us. And to that degree, we have set up an Ask Questions here in the attendee dropdown. So if you do have questions, which happens, please feel free to type them, and we'll read them to Jeff at the conclusion of his remarks today when he goes through the question and answer period. So at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to Jeff to begin your session.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'm just going to quickly introduce ourselves, who is Sandhills. We are a group of people that specialize in data management services, specifically around data architectures, data management processes, and practices. The aim of our business is to be able to help our clients produce trusted, verifiable, and governed data. Over and above the data architectures and ERwin as a product, we also support a lot of other secondary products to the ERwin modeling suite, such as the integration tools. We also support data management standards in a product called EM-SOS set of standards. So without further ado, let's move on. Just to give you a quick rundown, I know Kathy did introduce me. I'm the Technical Services Manager for the North American region for Sandhills Consultants. I've been in the IT business for many years and specialized in data architecture and data modeling for a majority of those years. I've helped clients implement ERwin methodologies and frameworks. I've worked from South Africa originally. I was involved in projects in New Zealand, the USA, and covered a majority of different industries and different types of data modeling environments, ranging from data warehouses, ODSs, enterprise data architectures, you name it, I've been involved with those. I've published and presented several times, presenting like I am today. And the most important thing I like to always raise is ERwin has always been my preferred data modeling tool. And I've been around with ERwin since the days of version 3.5. And I like to bring the best of practices and in-depth knowledge to all my clients with my ERwin experience. So let's just understand a bit more. I think Kathy did a good introduction to what we're going to be dealing with today. The core aspect of what we're going to be dealing with is really just about how do we actually get our ETL mappings into our ERwin data models, and likewise then to be able to export it to the ERwin web portal. And this is a tool that we will be looking at, is the data lineage importer that actually assists us to achieve those goals. So the data lineage importer, just giving us a quick summary what it's all about. It imports your ETL mappings from a spreadsheet into your ERwin data models. It imports the contents of the source model, so it's not just a textual-based import. So it actually physically links up to your source model, imports all the objects from there, and it automates the time-consuming process of manually capturing all of these mappings. ERwin gives us great functionality in being able to manage the mappings, but it doesn't give us any way of being able to introduce them into our models from a ETL spreadsheet. So this is really where this product comes in and helps you to be able to align those mappings to the source model and the target model, and then allows you to be able to export or push that to your ERwin web portal, and thus allowing you to be able to visualize your models in the ERwin web portal. So without going too much into talking about the actual products, I think it's time we actually drop out of the PowerPoint presentation, and we're actually going to jump straight into the demo portion of our exercise today. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to actually just open up ERwin quickly. Note I am working off of a ERwin Mart, and I'm just going to visualize the context of our models first so you can understand what we're working from. And all my models are sitting in the Mart, and I'm just going to go to my data warehouse staging model and open up the data warehouse staging model to just show you the sort of context of a typical model that we're going to be working with. And specifically, I'm going to drop into our, before I actually do that, I need to actually switch on my data movement settings, because none of that has been switched on in this particular model yet. And we're going to go into a particular table, and we're going to see we've got a data source tab because we switched it on, but we've got no mappings in our model at all at this point in time. If we also just have a look quickly on the Model Explorer side, we will notice that our data movement sources, we've got no data movement sources in the model. So these are typical models that you would find in a typical environment where you have not taken into consideration any of your ETL mappings and your data lineage at this point in time. Could be a reverse engineered model, could be a developed model, but you have not actually contemplated any of your ETL mappings at this point in time yet. So that's just showing you what it looks like in the ERwin environment. Next, I'm going to quickly jump to our ERwin web portal. And if we had to import those models, we're going to see what it visualizes like in an ERwin web portal environment. Bearing in mind, I've actually configured and imported all those models as they are at the moment, with none of the lineages set up. I'm not going to go into too much detail in the web portal side, how the web portal works. My assumption is that you are familiar with the web portal. If not, we can actually take it offline and actually give you a demo of the actual web portal itself. But this presentation is not really focusing on that aspect. So I'm just going to drill into one of my configurations, which is a configuration where I store my data lineage models that I was showing you. You'll notice the 6 models that we had in the Mart server environment. And if we go to our architectural diagram, we will notice our 6 models are all represented there, but there is no linkage between the models. So even if we go into one of the particular models, and I'm going to drill into my vendor Mart model, and we're going to drill into the tables and go to our purchase order vendor invoice item. And if we want to see where the data lineage comes from, we go through it. Let's have a look at this in a graphical view. We will notice that it doesn't really give us any context of where the data's come from. And this is one of the biggest challenges of the web portal environment. It's a very powerful tool, but you have to have your models aligned to be able to represent this information. Though there is functionality in the web portal to manually map these, so you can achieve the same results in the web portal manually, but once again, it's a time-consuming exercise to be able to import them into or to capture them in your web portal environment, and it doesn't give you the ability to be able to maintain them very well. Means every time you make a change to your models, you have to go once back again and actually go and fix them every time you re-import your models. So with that, I'm just going to close out of our web portal, and we're going to go to a tool that we've got, which is called our data lineage importer. And the context behind the data lineage importer, it's a tool that allows us to be able to import those ETL mappings into our ERwin data model. So quickly, just dropping back out of the help, I'm actually going to show you a typical spreadsheet that we will look at. The tool allows us to be able to generate our ETL mapping in a spreadsheet format and to be able to import it. Now, the layout of the standard spreadsheet, pretty much we can define the key aspects of where our source system comes from, the type of DBMS, etc. You've got a tab that will actually tell you about all the various DBMSs and the various versions. These all map to the ERwin DBMSs and versions accordingly. But the key aspect behind the ETL mapping spreadsheet is its ability to import information into the ERwin data model. So with that, understanding how the typical ETL mapping spreadsheets look, generally what most people have got, they might have an identifying number or something to be able to reference a specific mapping. You will have a source table and column and a target table and column and a typical transformation rule. Although most of this is imported into ERwin and it actually links the tables and columns appropriately to the model table and columns, the key aspect behind the transformation rule, it is really a open text box. If you're aware of the data source capability in ERwin, and generally what you would do is actually type in a pseudocode format for your ETL rules. Now, the typical reason we would type this as pseudocode, one, ERwin cannot generate any code from the ETL mappings in ERwin. It is not a tool that actually forward engineers into any ETL tool. It is purely for documentation purposes. And the best documentation capability is able to export it out to the ERwin web portal. So you want a business user to be able to understand the rule, what it's going to achieve, and likewise for your ETL developers to be able to understand it, to be able to capture that in an appropriate ETL tool with the appropriate language that they will be using. And if you migrate your ETL platform to another ETL tool, you don't want to have to go and develop all these transformation rules for the new ETL tool. It's pseudocode, so it should be able to be portable across all ETL tools. So that's the typical concept of the spreadsheet we use. And within the data lineage importer, you can actually generate that particular spreadsheet automatically to be able to capture it. Now, the key thing with the data lineage importer, you can either import it using a local file or a model coming from the MART. I'm going to be using models coming from the MART, and we're going to log into our MART and to be able to go and navigate to our various models that we want to use in our data lineage importing process. Now, as you'll notice by the 6 models that I've got highlighted, I'm going to go to the very first model that we've got in our chain, and our first model is our accounts payable. So we're going to select our accounts payable model as the source model. Then for our target model, we're going to select our receivable, our data warehouse staging model, and this typically could be a ODS or it could be a staging environment. Depends on the type of lineage you've got. I've got a fairly simple lineage here, so I'm just using a staging environment. And then you select your particular mapping spreadsheet. In this particular exercise, we are going from accounts payable to staging. So I'm going to open up the particular mapping spreadsheet for that particular environment. And we're going to then import all of our okay, something's gone wrong here. Let me just quickly close our data lineage importer because I see something has changed it according to the screen I'm working on. Okay, apologies for that. We're going to go to our MART and actually do that once again. And just log into my MART server once again. Okay, something really has gone a bit sideways for me today. Let me just quickly bounce my Mart services. And I checked everything before the presentation, and everything was working fine. Okay, obviously the Mart server had fallen over during the process, and hence why I had to restart our Mart server. Okay, going again, accounts payable is our source model. Our target model is our data warehouse staging model, and I'm going to be using the accounts payable to staging spreadsheet. And we're going to import all of these data lineage mappings from my ETL spreadsheet into our data warehouse staging model. And it has imported all of those mappings. The most important lines I want you to take note of here is the total ETL mappings. There were 106 ETL mappings. I've got 106 valid mappings and 0 invalid mappings. The reason I want to highlight this to you is, one, to show you the sort of aspect that we are putting in the mappings, and it is validating the mappings against the source model and the target model. So as we'll see later, if the valid mappings, if it's not a valid source or a target object that it's linking to, it won't import it into our models. So that is taking from our accounts payable. I'm going to go through the aspect of mapping all of our models for our demonstration. And the next one I take is my accounts receivable to our staging model. And we're going to select the mapping spreadsheet for that. And we are going to start the import. And I'm just going to quickly, while it's doing the import, I want to show you an option that we have. It's an option where we can actually highlight the actual mappings using a mapping ID, or we can actually have it without using the mapping ID. So it allows us the flexibility. If you remember from the spreadsheet, we got a column for the mapping ID, where it actually imports that mapping ID into our environment as well. By default, it will give us the mapping IDs as well. So I'm just going to go through our adjustments, and we're going to move our adjustments also into our staging environment, leaving the switch on. And okay, we need a mapping spreadsheet for that. And we're going to import our adjustment model into our data warehouse staging model using the appropriate mapping spreadsheet. The next one we're going to do is take from our staging, and we're going to move into our dimensional model. And if you can visualize this in your mind, how the data is slowly moving through your environment, and we are doing all of those particular mappings that have come in via ETL mapping spreadsheets. And this time, I'm going to switch off our mappings, our mapping IDs, and we're going to import that into our dimensional model. And we're going to now import the last of the mappings, which is going to come from our dimensional model, and we are going to push it into our vendor mart. And we are then going to use our dimensional to our vendor mart or our mart mapping spreadsheet. And maybe before we actually go into that, just quickly to have a look at this particular model, the actual spreadsheet that we use. And the typical spreadsheet that we use for this, as we noted before, we've got the standard spreadsheet all completed with all of our mappings. And One of the benefits of using something like Excel or Excel spreadsheets to be able to capture this in ETL mappings is the power of being able to use the power of Excel to be able to manipulate and massage our data into the appropriate columns, etc. So even if your mappings don't come in a standard format, so they aren't nice and neatly laid out as per the standard spreadsheet format, you can then take a ETL mapping that you've got from another environment or a custom version of the spreadsheet, and you can use all of the lookup capabilities and the typical capabilities that Excel will provide to you to be able to manipulate the data or massage it to bring it into the standard format that we use for importing into our environment. So that's the typical spreadsheet as it would look like when it's been completed appropriately to be able to import it. And we're going to import that spreadsheet so we can map our dimensional models as a source and our vendor mart as a target model. Now, once again, in the beginning, I brought your attention to the actual mappings. This time we will notice something that has occurred. There were total mappings of 80, but only 79 were valid mappings. So the tool also lets you understand when you've actually got a mapping that actually hasn't been effectively imported into your model. And if you've got invalid mappings, you will actually get a list further down that will actually detail which invalid mappings didn't work. So through this, we can see from our dimensional model being pushed into our the vendor mart environment. We can see the exact particular table, the column, all that information in our mapping spreadsheet, and it tells us that our target column is not found. So it's validated our model based on the spreadsheet to make sure that it exists in our model, or if it doesn't exist, it will actually notify us that it doesn't exist. Now, typically what you could do is actually go to that spreadsheet. It might be something as simple as a typo. It could be lots of reasons why it didn't find that information. But through this, we'll be able to streamline the process and identify where those errors were. And the benefit of the data lineage importer is the ability, once you've actually done an import, you have the ability to first delete all the source data lineage objects and any mappings that are associated with it. So once you've actually done an import and you've discovered that it didn't work as well as you'd like it to, you can actually flag that it will actually delete all the existing mappings between those two models based on the spreadsheet and go and re-import them again. And once again, you just go and select your dimensional model. You will then select your target being your vendor mart. And likewise, you would normally use the updated spreadsheet. I'm just going to re-import the same spreadsheet and reintroduce it into my target model. This functionality also helps us to be able to maintain a regular update path for your spreadsheets. So for the argument might be that you actually got a project one where you do a whole lot of mappings and you go and enhance those mappings and you want to reintroduce it to your models. It will re-import the source models back into your environment. So if your source model changed, it will reintroduce the updated model. It will then take the mappings, which have now also been updated to include those changes in your source model and reintroduce it into your target model again. Remember, all of your ETL mappings are always stored in your target model. So your target model is a model that will actually be updated. So bear that in mind during the process of importing. And just quickly jumping back to our ERwin environment, let me first disconnect from the mart and reconnect because of our issues earlier. And this time I'm actually going to go into our typical staging model. Before I actually go into that, I just want to show you in our catalog manager, all my models were actually zeroed out as a single version. And you will notice that we've now increased the versions of our particular models for each of the imports. So if you remember, our data warehouse staging model was used for importing between the three source models. Our dimensional model was then used to be able to import our staging model, always remembering the target model stores the version information. And our vendor mart, remember, we ran the import twice. So we've actually got two sets of imports in that particular model. So let's actually go and open up that particular model. And this time we're going to open up that same staging model again. Looks very much the same as we had. And if we go to our model properties, we will notice our data movement has been switched on automatically for us. And if we go and expand the data movement sources, you will notice that we've got our accounts payable, accounts receivable, and the adjustments source data movement sources. Let's quickly just drill into our accounts receivable. You'll notice it's imported all the tables for accounts receivable. And if we actually drill into the customer table, we will notice all the columns have been imported likewise, bringing in not only just the column name, but the data types and the definitions as would normally have happened with any practice of importing a model. So through that, we've been able to automate the generation of all this information in our ERwin model. Closing out from that, I'm actually going to go to our address entity and go down to our column properties. We will notice that we now have automated from our ETL mapping spreadsheet the particular mappings in our model level at our column level. Noting not only does it import the single instance of where our data sources come from, but when it's got multiple instances, we'll pull it in, or even pull it in for our multiple different source models of where it came from. Detailing our movement rules. As a practice, it's always best to be able to put which source you're referring to and the type of data movement rule you've got to apply to it. Also noting our mapping IDs have been incorporated so we can actually track those back. And I've actually got clients that use the mapping IDs to attach it to a requirements document. So in your requirements, it would actually state a requirement to be able to move a particular mapping. This allows you to use that mapping ID to be able to incorporate that information in the actual documentation that you're producing from your ERwin data model. So as you can see, these have all been brought into our ERwin model. I'm not going to go into each of the models. I'm actually going to close out of here. And now we're going to jump back to our ERwin web portal environment. Now, understanding the concepts behind the ERwin web portal environment, ERwin web portal is got a separate repository from our ERwin Mart server. And to be able to introduce models into our ERwin web portal environment, you need to do a process called harvesting. And the harvesting is actually the importing of the particular models. Now, originally, I'd imported the models as they were originally with no data lineage. So what I need to do here is re-import those particular models. And I'm going to use the script to import it. The reason I use the script because it automates the process of updating my configuration. And it will then do all of those models, or go to each of the models that were in the Mart server and identify which models have changed, remembering that our accounts receivable, our accounts payable, and our adjustment model were still the same model. They haven't actually changed because the information about where the mappings lie always sit in the target model. So now it will be just importing those target models and introducing them into our new configuration and then into our ERwin web portal. And as this process goes through, it's now opening up each of those models, extracting the metadata out and putting them into the web portal. Please bear in mind, yes, you will notice some errors or some warnings coming up at the moment. This is due to the particular models themselves that I'm using for the demonstration. This is typically what you'd do. You'd actually streamline your particular models prior to importing them into the ERwin web portal. As I said, this is not an ERwin web portal demonstration. This is actually a demonstration of how to get those lineages into your ERwin web portal. So once again, we're going to jump back into our demonstration configuration. And one of the first things we'll also notice, part of the process once we've gone in, we will notice that 3 models have been updated. You will notice this by the introduction of the version indication in our ERwin web portal. The other aspect, we will notice these warning signals. Now, the reason we've got these warning signals coming up is because we've got connections between models, and because of the same reason, we can actually introduce models of different names for our lineage compared to what they called in our data lineage. We need to actually associate the connection to a particular model in our environment. So the first time you import your models when they've got the particular lineages in them, we need to just map the connection to the actual model where it's stored in our repository. Now, because I've imported it using the standard names and I haven't changed any names, it will match on a one-to-one basis. So we need to just do all of the particular models and refresh all the particular source stores for those particular connections. And we need to just go to accounts receivable. For accounts receivable, our adjustments connection for our adjustments model. And the last one is our vendor mart. And we need to just make the linkage between our dimensional model to our dimensional model in our store. So through that, we've now been able to update all of those connections. Now, also bearing in mind that once I've established those connections between the models, when I redo the import of the updated versions, it will remember that information and we will not have to do this again. But whenever we've worked on these updating of any models in our configuration, we need to always validate. So this builds a connection at the entity and attribute level between our models. So by doing the validation in our ERwin web portal, we will reestablish those connections that we had in the actual models and thus allow us to be able to drill into our architectural diagram. And we will now notice the connections between all of our models have been established. So typical connections, we will see these dark black lines are representative of our data lineage. And if you remember the process when we went through of actually capturing our ETL mappings into our models, we had accounts payable going into our staging, our accounts receivable going into staging, and our adjustments going into staging. Then we moved the data from our staging to our dimensional, and from our dimensional to our vendor mart. So I'm going to drill straight into our vendor mart environment and go into that same table that we looked at earlier, our purchase order, the purchase order vendor invoice item table, and we are going to do our trace data lineage once again. and we're going to go into the graphical view of it and just have a look at that from a graphical perspective. And I'm just going to minimize that so we can see a bit better on the screen. And actually, let's just quickly zoom ourselves to fit. And we can see we've got a lot of lineage coming into our model. But remembering this has been represented at our table levels, let's take that and go to our feature level. And feature level is actually showing us the lineage at a column level. So as you can see from this, we've got a lot of mappings going on. I probably can't read most of the names of the actual columns, but understanding that each of these columns and all of that lineage has come from the ETL mappings of those spreadsheets. Let's take a good example. I'm going to just click on our city, and maybe a good thing to just switch on our highlight tool in our ERwin web portal, and quite literally we can see our spider web of how the city works. And our city field is passed through, and maybe let's roll straight down to our billing city and just have a look at the lineage, trace the data lineage for just that particular column. And once again, we can see where that data has come from. So our business community, our consumers of our data models in our ERwin web portal will be able to see our billing city, where it has all come from through the process. And I also want to quickly show you on our left-hand side our data movement rules, where the mapping information has been mapped. So our information for our billing city in our purchase order vendor item, invoice item has come from our dimensional model in a table name billing city, mapping ID 66, and it's a straight move. Let's quickly jump into the city field in our address table. In our staging environment, once again, we can look at that data movement rule that we got applied, and we can see all the information, where it comes from, our billing address city, so we can see there our billing address city column and the type of rule, and our mapping ID, which can be associated back to a particular mapping that might be connected to a specific requirement in our requirements document. So through that, we've been able to import our lineage right through into our portal and introduce these lineages, and to be able to visually conceptualize it in our ERwin web portal. So that pretty much brings us to the end of our demonstration. I'm just going to quickly recap on the data lineage importer. It's a tool to be able to import our models from our source model to our target model. It interacts with our MART server, or we can work from local files, and to be able to introduce the mappings in our spreadsheet. The options that it allows us to be able to re-import our models. So if we've got an updated model on a model and a mapping spreadsheet, we can reintroduce those on a regular basis. And we can actually then also highlight our mapping IDs using any sort of coding that we would like to use in our IDs to be able to track it back to the requirements documents. So let's quickly jump back to our presentation, and I'm just going to go past our demo slide. The benefits of importing your spreadsheets via this tool: it's a time-saving capability. Time is always money. It's an efficient process, so you don't have to repeat your mappings or run the risk of getting your mappings out of date. So it's efficient, it's easy, and less repetitive work to be done. Accuracy: once you've imported it, it validates your source model, your target models, and being able to report back to you on any misaligned mappings, so thus producing fewer errors. And all this is updating in your ERwin models. So even if you don't have the ERwin web portal in your environment, you're planning to implement it in the future, or you want to export your mappings to some other format of reporting, bearing in mind in the ERwin environment, you've got the very rich reporting capability to be able to export your model environment, including all of your ETL mappings, which are now stored in your source to target mappings in your model. You can then export that to be able to provide to your developers, your ETL developers, to be able to do their mappings in their environment. And this brings us to the end of the presentation. I would like to just remind you that we've got the upcoming session lined up for Wednesday, the 21st of September from 2 to 3 p.m. It's going to be presented by Danny Sandwell. It's going to be the Big Data Modeling and Big Data Governance Summers session.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. Go ahead.
I was going to say all the previous summer sessions are also available on demand. This one will be available after it's been uploaded, so you can always go and recap on the presentations. So,
which is exactly what I was going to say. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Yes, we're getting in that last session at the last moment. I think that is officially the last day of summer on the 21st. You did receive a couple questions, Jeff.
Okay.
I'm going to read this one cold. I'll read the latest one first. On the second and following imports of the same mappings, are just the changes loaded to the target model, or the complete set of mappings are reloaded?
It actually reloads the complete set of mappings. So it will identify if there's any, so if you've deleted a particular mapping, it will actually remove the deleted ones as well, and then reload the mappings based on the source to target aspect. But it's also dependent on whether you ask the question to delete or not to delete.
Thank you for that. How about this? Does it have export capability as well, meaning to say that we can then use the same template?
What you could do, and what I have done with, for one other client, is we actually generate a report in the ERwin environment where they've been able to export the existing mappings out into a equivalent of the ETL mapping spreadsheet. So yes, using the standard or the rich capability of the ETL, of the reporting capability in ERwin, you can generate reports that represent the same thing in the ERwin side, yes.
Okay. What happens if I don't have a model of the source system?
Okay, if you don't have a model of the source system, the tool is specifically geared around model-to-model mappings. So my recommendation is always to be able to reverse engineer the model into a ERwin model. So even if you use a basic reverse engineered model, you don't have to reflect all of the subject areas and diagrams appropriately, but it does do the linking of a source model. Now, typically, when you start thinking about representing it in the web portal environment, for the lineages actually to work, you need to actually have a model in the ERwin web portal environment. And also bearing in mind that you can also export out of the ERwin web portal. So even if you've used the ERwin web portal to generate a model, using its reverse engineering capability in the web portal side, you could actually export that model, use that for your source to target mappings, and then just not import that model. And remember on that screen where we had to actually link the the source models to the actual model in the ERwin web portal, you would then use the appropriate model in the ERwin web portal to be able to link that mapping to it.
Great. If we are not responsible for the ETL mappings and the department that is has a different format to yours and are not prepared to adopt yours, how can we use theirs in your tool?
Okay. Typically, the answer is fairly easy. If they are using a different format, you can either manipulate the data by copy and pasting straight into the spreadsheet quite easily. I found a lot of clients have actually used that approach. And I've also found some other clients that have a very complex mapping spreadsheet, and I've actually been involved with them and assisted them to actually customize the mapping spreadsheet. I don't customize the format, but I actually developed a API capability in the spreadsheet to be able to link to the format that's used by the team that was actually doing the ETL mappings, and to be able to suck the information out of their format and bring it into the standard format that we use in the Data Lineage Importers tool format.
Sounds a little complex. Sounds like a great project, quite frankly. What happens if our mappings are in different spreadsheets for the same models? For example, there might be two spreadsheets that cover from model A to model B.
Okay, that's fairly simple. You would actually run the import with the same source and the same target, just with a different spreadsheet. I would understand this typically being different projects, and by doing that, you'd be able to introduce the different mappings between the source and the target environments, and the mappings will just be reflected coming from different spreadsheets.
Okay, thank you. Sean is saying there are currently no new questions in the drop down, so we're current and up to date. We'll allow folks 30 more seconds to come up with follow-up questions. But in the meantime, I would like to, early on, thank you so much for your time and obvious knowledge of the web portal and how you support your clients across the world in implementations and best practices. And we appreciate that. And as always, for anyone that has follow-up questions after we close out today's session, we'll be happy to connect you with Jeff. You see his email address there, as well as provide the materials from today for everyone. Hold on, I just got something. Nope, nothing new. Okay, so Jeff, we're up to date on our questions. Again, thank you for allowing a little promotion as well for Danny's final webcast next week on our Any Squared strategy, which is really the foundation of what ERwin Inc. now is, supporting modeling and governance and big data, managing data from any source, anywhere it resides. So it's really an overview of not only where ERwin has been and where ERwin is going. So we hope everyone will join us. But for today, Jeff, I give the floor to you to have any concluding remarks, and we thank you again.
Thank you, Kathy. Concluding wise, you can see my details there. You can contact me. Robert Lutton is also available. If I'm not available and I'm on a project or anything like that, please reach out to Robert. He will be able to satisfy any questions or queries that you might have, and any services that we provide from a Sandhills consultant's perspective.
Thank you so much. We can conclude today's webcast event. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending.